For this project, I am going to give you a brief overview of how to edit images inside of Photoshop, and this will give you an idea of the way that you can work with some of the tools and features and adjustments inside of the application. So here I have an image pulled up, and it's this girl wearing this red dress. Now, you can pick any image you want to. However, if you want to follow along with this file, I'll provide that for you, and you can open up this file. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how you can make some edits to the image, and then finally I'll show you how we can change the color of the dress. And just like most things in Photoshop and Adobe programs, there's more than one way that we can go about doing that. So I'll give you a couple ideas of how you can fix that or how you can change the dress color, but as you begin learning more about the program, you might find better ways to do it or a way that you prefer over the way that I'm about to show you. So I just want you to keep in mind that though I'm showing you one method, there's multiple ways of going about this. So first of all, we can make any adjustments that we want with any of the tools in the tool panels. So we can make selections and edit those. We can paint on it with the paintbrush. We can add type and so forth. But if we want to edit this like it's a photograph, there is a bunch of different settings that we can change. If you go up to the top and you click on Image, and then you go down to Adjustments, you will see a lot of different types of adjustments that you can make for this photo. So we can change the brightness and contrast, we can change the exposure of the camera, we can change the hue and saturation, or give it a photo filter, and so forth. And there's a lot of these, and we won't be able to cover all of them, but I'll pick one or two and just show you how they work. So for instance, I'm going to select brightness and contrast, and for this particular one, it pulls up a brightness and contrast sliders. So as we drag the brightness slider up, you can see that the photo actually gets brighter. And as we drag that down, it gets darker. And then there's contrast, so how much contrast is in between the pixels. So as we bring this up, the image gets very contrasted, and as we bring it down, it gets desaturated and has a lot less contrast. So you can mess around with these settings. We can bring up the contrast and mess around with the brightness, and then there's a preview button, and if we turn that off and on, you can actually see the changes that are happening inside of the photo. Whenever we want to save that, we just hit OK, and it'll actually save those changes for us, and now we can keep editing the document. However, just keep in mind that it has stored this inside of Photoshop's history, and if we make a bunch of edits, it might be a little hard to get back to this. So I'm actually going to show you in just a moment a better way of adding these adjustments. But let's go ahead and take a look at some others. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to go down to Image, I'm going to go to Adjustments, and this time let's change the hue and saturation. Now what this does is it allows us to change the actual hue tones of this image, and we also have saturation and lightness here too. So as I drag the slider, our midpoint is right here, and as I go one way or the other, it's actually changing the hues of each of the pixels. So you can see her dress changes a color, and then also the background changes because those pixels are being manipulated too. Well, if we want to change just the dress color, we're going to have to choose out just that dress and have it on its own layer or its own selection so that we don't manipulate the background also. There's another cool feature where if you hit this colorize button, instead of using this as a midpoint slider, now you can actually colorize the whole photograph and say what hue, saturation, and lightness values you want. So I'm just going to turn up the saturation so it's easier to see. And you can see the hue is on a red, so it gives it this warm reddish color. And as I move that, we can adjust the whole image. So this can give us a very cool stylized look. We can colorize just the image we want, and then we can also, go ahead and add in text or anything else we want. This is a great way to do a cheap sepia tone trick just by turning it to maybe say a kind of goldish brown color and then desaturating it a little bit and messing around with some of the lightness and saturation values, and it gives you kind of that old photograph look. It's not the best way to do it, but it is a quick and easy way to come in and make a sepia tone type image for your photograph. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel that out. And you'll see other types of adjustments. So those are based on sliders. If we pick something like the levels or curves, they might look a little different. This is allowing us to adjust the brightness channels of each individual pixels. Right now we have all pixels selected, red, greens, and blues. And if I come in here and I manipulate this graph by, say, moving this slider up or moving it over, it actually adjusts the brightness values of all of those. A great thing about this is I can click in the middle and it creates a curve, so there's a nicer fall off or incline than if you were just moving them individually. So I can get a much better look by using these curves, and by lifting this up, it gives a much smoother transition between those colors. I can hit the delete key to delete out that point. I also have the ability to do this on an individual basis. So if I just want to adjust the reds, I can go to the red channel and then I can manipulate the curve, and there are some red pixels in the whole image, but by adjusting this, I can change out and manipulate the brightness and darkness values of the reds in this image. So you'll see that under the adjustments, there's multiple different types of adjustments you can make, and each one might look a little different based on the settings. We'll click on, say, the photo filter, and this one is pretty cut and dry. It's just you pick a filter and you tell how dense you want it to be. So for instance, we can go down, we can pick sepia here, and then we can give it a density, and as I move that, you can see that changing. Now this is a much better sepia trick, so you can come in and change that with a photo filter and leave in some of those colors. It's not adjusting the whole image, but it's adding that sepia color. So if we wanted to make it more blue, we could do the same thing here. It keeps those colors, here's 0, and then as I move it in, it just blue tints that whole image. I can give it a warming filter and that'll just kind of warm it up a little bit. So here it's kind of a cool background, but if I want to warm up the image, I can give it a small density with the warming filter and it gives us this nice warm background. So we can go ahead and hit OK and save that. But again, the issue with that is once you've made that change and you make any edits, it's going to be hard to go back to the original file, because as you come in and start adding text and layers and different things, if you want to go back and say now change that contrast or hue and saturation or one of those adjustments, you won't be able to. So there's a better way to working inside of Photoshop. It's called working non-destructively. And what that means is we can actually edit the photo without actually damaging it in any way, so that we always maintain the original if we need to edit it, and it's just a much nicer way to work. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that warming filter, and let's start editing this photo. The first thing I always do is I always turn the background into just a standard layer, not a background layer. So we can double click on this and we can give this layer name. So let's call this layer original. It unlocks it for us, so we have full capability to make any edits, and we've named it and we can move it around and so forth. Let's also go ahead and save this file out, so as we begin working we can make saves of this. So we'll go to File, Save, or Control S or Command S on Mac OS. I'll hit that, and then we're in the folder we want to be in, and we'll just call this Woman in Red Dress. And it'll say, do we want to turn on maximize compatibility with other versions of Photoshop? I always just hit OK. That was if I'm working on this and give it to you and you're in an earlier version, you might be able to open this up a little easier. So I'll hit OK. That's fine. So one thing I always do whenever I begin working is I always keep the original copy separate and on its own layer, just in case I ever make any major mistakes. I have the original copy still intact. So I'm going to go down, I'm going to click on the original layer, and I'm going to click and drag it to the new layer button and let go, and it will make a copy for me. Let's go ahead and rename this copy. I just double click on the name there and we'll call it Woman in Red Dress. So that's our layer we're going to be working with. I'm going to go ahead back to the original, and if I want to, I can lock it and hide it. And I just do that as a backup. That's just a personal preference for me, that when I begin working, if I ever run into an issue where I've made too many changes or I really messed something up and I need a copy of that original to edit, I have it hidden and locked here, so I can always just come back and bring that original back in, make a copy, and keep working. So it's just kind of a fail-safe for me personally. You don't have to do it, but I recommend it because it just There's times where I wish I had the original and I didn't, so I learned the hard way. So I'm going to go to the woman in the red dress. And what we can do now is we can actually manipulate this image by using what's called adjustment layers. An adjustment layer is a way to add in a layer on top of the woman in red dress, and it allows you to work non-destructively, which means no matter how many edits I make afterwards, I can come back and fix the options in the adjustment layer. So let me show you how that works. Down at the bottom, there is an adjustment layer button, and we're going to click and hold that down. And you're going to see a lot of the same adjustments we saw before. So we have, we can add in a solid color, gradient or pattern. We have our brightness and contrast. There's levels, curves, exposure, hue and saturation, photo filter, all these ones that we saw before. Let's go ahead and choose that photo filter again. So I'm going to click on it. And it doesn't bring open a new panel window, but it does show it in the properties panel window on the right hand side. Because I have my properties panel in here and I use it often, it popped it up right here for us. So now we can pick whatever of those filters we wanted. So we'll just stick with that warming filter we had, and then we can go ahead and adjust the density. And remember, as I move this up, you can see it warms up the photo, but it doesn't really mess with all the colors. So we can just give this a nice warmer look than if we want to, or cooler look, or whatever you want to. Preserve luminosity will just preserve the lights, highlights, brightnesses, and so forth. If you turn that off, on and off, you can kind of see how that affects it, but we'll leave it on because we like those nice highlights that are on the skin and the clothes there. And let me just turn this down just a little bit. That might be a little too much. Well, we'll just do 50% for now. But what's happening is, as you can see in the layers panel, it's created a new photo filter layer, and this layer can be edited later on. So you don't really see anything in the preview window. This is actually for a mask, and we won't use that right now, but it's adjusting the layers beneath them, all layers beneath it. So you can see that it's editing the woman in the red dress. If we hide that and we pull up the original, it's editing that one too. So this adjustment layer is editing everything that is beneath it. But the great thing about this is if I go in here and let's just say I add in some text here. I'm just going to write dress, and that may be hard to see. So just make it red and a little bigger. And let's just imagine that, you know, we're going in and we're making all kinds of adjustments and adding things in and so forth. If I'd put the photo filter as my first action inside of Photoshop, and then I needed to go back, I would have to undo the history and it would get rid of all my edits. And that is not what I want. However, no matter how many edits I make, I can always go to this adjustment layer and make changes. So let's say that I did all these edits, but then I realized, oh, I didn't want a warming filter, I want a cool filter. Well, if I click on that adjustment layer, I can actually go back to the photo filter options, and then I can pick a cooling filter. And now you'll see that it actually fixes that for me, and it keeps all my edits intact. This is what's called working non-destructively. It basically means that we're not affecting the actual photo. We're not making edits to the actual photograph itself. We're making adjustments on their own layers, and we can keep or delete these or hide them. Like, let's say I wanted to go ahead and hide this layer. I didn't want it anymore. I could hide it. I could delete it, and I can always go back and make changes as I see fit. So I'm going to go ahead and delete out this dress layer, this dress type layer here. And I just think that's too strong. Let's go down to 35%. And if I want to see the differences, I can just unhide and show that off and on, and it shows me. So it gives it a nice little warm touch to the photograph, which I think is pretty cool.